Welcome to part 2 of this 3-part tutorial series where we're creating these terrazzo tile materials. So if you haven't seen the first part, then I'll have the link in the description. And in the first part, we created this terrazzo tile material here, and then also this one here. And so in this part, we're going to be creating 2 more, and then the last part we'll be creating 2 more to create 6 total materials. And if you'd like to purchase the tutorial files to use the materials in your projects, you can get that on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page. The links are in the description. You can also check out my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack if you'd like to purchase all of my materials, and my Ultimate Material Pack comes with all of my materials pre-set up for Blender's asset browser with custom thumbnails, sorted catalogs, and customizable node groups. And I also update the material pack every time I create 10 more procedural materials. You can also check out my Blender Procedural Material Tutorial playlist to learn how to create more materials. And then one more thing before we start, I wanted to let you know about my Rusty Fire Hydrant Blender tutorial series. So this is a paid course and it's a 4-part tutorial series. And in the tutorial series, I show you how to model this fire hydrant, and then we set up some lighting. Then we create some different procedural materials for the paint and the metal where the paint has been worn away and the rust. And then we do texture painting, and we texture paint where we want the rust to be and where we want to wear the paint away. And then we add the chains hanging off the fire hydrant and do the final renders. So by the end of the tutorial series, you'll have this rusty fire hydrant 3D model. If you'd like to check out the course trailer video, I'll have a link in the description, and you can also check out the product pages linked in the description. So let's now create the next terrazzo tile material. So I'm going to select this object here. I'll press Shift D to duplicate it, and then I'm going to move it over on the X-axis, and we'll just move it right over there, and then I'll just zoom into it. Let's drag this over here, and I'll select the object, and then let's just click on the X button here just to delete that material. We'll add a new material, and this one I'll rename to Terrazzo Tile 3. Now I'm going to use the same mapping because we want it to look like there are tiles. If I just select the previous one that we did in the last tutorial, you can see we have the tile scale, so you can see I can scale up those tiles there. And so I'm going to use the same mapping so that when we scale up the tiles, the texture is going to be placed randomly per tile. So if I just select one of these objects here, the one that we made previously, we can go into edit mode, and I'm going to select the mapping and then hold down the shift key and select the other texture coordinates, the mapping, and the brick texture. So just hold down the shift key and select all of these nodes. I'll press Ctrl C to copy them. Then if we click on the new object here, we can press Ctrl V to paste them, and we can just drag them down here. And this is the mapping that we'll use. And so this brick texture here, that is going to be the tiles. So the mapping here can go into the other materials and textures that we're going to be making. So I want to create another group of nodes here, which is going to be a noise texture. And the noise texture is going to kind of distort the Voronoi textures that we're going to add to create those little chunks similar to what we did with the other materials. So I'll go to the add menu, and I'm going to search for a noise texture, and let's drop it here. And then I can Control Shift and select the noise texture to preview it. And let's change some of the settings. So the scale and the detail, I'm going to both turn those to 8, but then I'll leave the other settings how they are. Now, later on when we create the Voronoi textures, I want the noise texture to have less of an effect over the Voronoi, so it's not distorting it quite as much. So what we're going to do is search for a mix color node, and we'll drop the mix color after the noise. Now, the noise texture factor is going to go into color B, and then we're going to take this mapping vector here, and we're going to put that into color A. So we're mixing between the noise texture, which is distorted, and the mapping, which is only distorted by the brick texture. And then on the mix here, we're going to change the type to linear light, and we'll be able to use this factor to distort it more and less. So we'll box select these nodes. You can press Ctrl J to add a frame. Let's press F2 with the frame selected to add a label, and I'll rename this to distortion. So we can drag these nodes back here, and let's now create the chunks group. So I'll go to the add menu, and I'm going to search for a Voronoi texture, and let's drop it right here. And then I can Control Shift and select the Voronoi to preview it. I want to preview the distance value, and we'll change some of the settings. So I'll turn the scale to a 12.5, and I'll turn the detail up just a very small amount to like a 0.5. Now you can already see that because the linear light here, this is going into the Voronoi, it's distorting the Voronoi a lot. And if I change the factor, it's going to distort it more or less. So on this factor here, I want to turn this to a very small number of 0.03, so just a 0.03, so it's not distorting it very much, but it is a little bit noisy on the edges. And then also here on the F1, let's change this type to distance to edge, and now you can see that factor there is just distorting it by a very small amount. So now after the Voronoi, I want to make it more contrasty. So let's search for a color ramp, and we're going to put the color ramp here after the Voronoi. And then let's drag the black tab and drag the white tab together. We're going to drag them pretty close, like right over here. And this is going to be those large chunks. chunks. Now I also want to be able to change the size of each individual chunk. So if we go to the add menu, we can search for the hue saturation value, and we're going to put this between the Voronoi and the color ramp. And it has a value here which we can use, so we can turn this up and down, and that's going to make the material or the texture lighter and darker. So that is making it appear as though those kind of rocks there or that texture there is getting bigger or smaller. Whereas this scale here is scaling the entire thing. So let's box select these nodes. You can press Ctrl J to add a frame, and let's select the frame and press F2 to add a label, and I'm going to call this large chunks. So we're now going to be duplicating this group here, and we're going to make some medium-sized chunks and some small chunks. So let's box select all the nodes. I'll press Ctrl Shift D to duplicate them. So Ctrl Shift D will duplicate them, but it'll keep these wires plugged up. Now let's do that one more time. So Ctrl Shift D, drop it here. We can select all these and maybe just move them up a little bit. Let's click on this one and press F2 to give it a label. And I'll rename this one to medium chunks. Select this one, press F2 to add a label to rename this. And I'm going to rename this one to small chunks. So let's Control Shift and select the medium chunks. And for this, I first want to change the scale here of the Voronoi. So I'm going to change this scale to like a 40. And then if I go over here to this color ramp, I want to drag this back here and drag this over to make it much smaller. So we'll drag that to about there, and this one to about here, drag them pretty close. And then also this detail value, I want to turn that to 0. Let's also Control Shift and select the small chunks, and I also want to turn the detail to 0. And then here on the scale, I want to turn this up to like a 55, so it's a bit smaller. And then we can also drag the white tab back and drag the black tab over a little bit to right there, and drag the white tab over kind of like that. So now we have small chunks, medium chunks, and large chunks. So we'll be eventually mixing them all together. First, let's just mix this medium chunks and the small chunks together. So if you hold down the Shift key and select both of the color ramps, you can press Ctrl 0. Ctrl 0 is going to add this mix color here. So let's open it up and drag it down. And I just want to add the white values because the white values are the chunks. So if I click on the mix here, I can change it to lighten, and that way it'll just add the light values. So now I can drag the factor up, and I can just turn it all the way up to 1. So now the medium chunks and the small chunks have been joined together. Now we have the small chunks, the medium chunks, and the large chunks, but these are basically just masks of where they are, but we don't actually have any colors yet. So we're going to be creating some more groups, which are going to be the different colors. So first, let's go to the add menu, and we're going to search for a noise. We're going to be using this to make the different colored areas. And we also do want to just distort it a little bit, so we can use this linear light here and plug that into the vector of the noise. Let's Control Shift and select the noise to preview it. And we can now change the settings. So I'll turn the scale to like a 9. And I'll turn the detail to 8. And I'll turn this roughness here to like a 0.7. And then to make it more contrasty, we can search for a color ramp. We'll put the color ramp here after the noise texture. And I can drag the black tab over here, and then also drag the white tab right over there so it's more contrasty. So now we can make both of the different colors. So to make the colors, we can add a mix color here. Let's drop this here. We can put the color into the factor. So now we have colors A and B, so we can make 2 different custom colors. So for the first color, I want to make this kind of like a darkish bluish color like that. And this other color is going to be kind of like a light brown, something like that. And if you want to use the same exact hex values that I'm using, color A is going to be a hex value of 222A33, and color B is going to be a hex value of 66,4A39. So let's box select these nodes, join them together into a frame. We can add a label to this, and I'll call this colored noise. Now I also want to create something similar to this, but it's just going to be gray. So we're going to box select all these nodes, press Ctrl Shift D to duplicate them all and bring them up here. And we can select the colored noise, press F2 to change the label. And this one I'm just going to call gray noise. So now for this one, I want to drag the white tab back here. Let's actually Control Shift and select it so we can preview what it's doing. So I want to make it less contrasty. So I'm going to drag the white tab like over here, and the black tab, I'll maybe drag it over a little bit. And then we can also change a few of the noise settings. So I'll turn the scale to 30 so we can see more of the noise. And I'll also turn this roughness down to like a 0.6, and I can leave the detail at 8. So now we can make the 2 different custom colors. So color A is just going to be like a gray color. So let's go to the RGB. We can click on all these values and just change them all to 1 so it's fully white, and then just turn it down so it's kind of like a light gray. And then color B, that's just going to be fully black. And if you want to use the same exact gray color, the hex value is going to be 8E, 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 but then color B will just be fully black, so the hex value is just going to be 6 zeros. So now we have the colored noise and the gray noise, and we're going to mix them together with the chunks. So let's select this light in here, and I'll press Shift D to duplicate it and drop it here. And then we can take this light in here. This one is going to be the mask of the medium chunks and the small chunks, and we're going to put that into the factor to determine what part will be color A and what part will be color B. So let's Control Shift and select the light to preview it. So now I can take the colored noise, we can put the mix here and put that into color B, and then on the gray noise we can take the mix and put that into color A. Now you can see that it's not really showing up, and that's because we need to take the light in and we need to turn this back to mix. So now you can see this light in here is light and black, and that is going into the mix to determine what part is A and what part is B. So now the colored noise, that is where the chunks are, and the gray noise, that is where the rest of it is. So now you can see the gray noise is showing up. Let's duplicate this mix node and drop it here, because we're now going to be mixing in the large chunks. So the large chunks here, this is going to go into the factor, and then this mixed result here, that's going to go into color A. So now for color B, we can take the same gray noise and we can put that into color B. So now you can see that there's going to be gray noise where the large chunks are. However, because it's the same texture, it's disappearing, you can't really see it. So what I'm going to do is search for a hue saturation value, and we're going to put this in between the gray noise mix and color B. So stick it there, and just to make this look nicer, I'm going to drag it down here, maybe drag these up here like that. So now I can take the value here and I can turn this down, and this is going to make just those large chunks be darker. And I'm going to turn the value to a 0.5. So now you can see we have those smaller chunks, which are kind of red and orange. We have those larger chunks with our gray, and then the rest of it is just kind of that light gray. So now let's just drop the principled shader right in here. So just make the mix result be going into the base color, and you can Control Shift and select the principled shader to preview it. And also the roughness, let's turn the roughness way down to like a 0.2 so it is more shiny. So now we can make the bumps. So what I want to do is I want to put the large chunks and the medium chunks and the small chunks all together into the normal, but I want to mix them all together so that they're all happening at the same time. So what I'm going to do is duplicate this lighten and drop it here. And we can take this lighten result and we're going to put that into color B. Let's Control Shift and select the lighten to preview it. And then we're going to take the large chunks and we're going to put that into color A. And then just make sure the factor is 1. So now you can see it's mixing them all together. So it's just one mask now. So now we can search for a bump node, and we can drop the bump node here, and the result can go into the height value, and the bump normal can go into the normal, the shader, and let's Control Shift and select the shader to preview it. So you can see now the edges are bumpy. One thing that I want to do is invert it so that it's going back in instead of out. And then also let's turn this bump strength to a 0.04, just a 0.04, so it is very subtle, but in the custom node group you'll be able to make it more bumpy if you want to, but I do want this to be pretty smooth. Then I also just want to add a little bit of noise over the surface, so we'll duplicate the bump node and drop it here, and let's go all the way up here, and we can take this noise factor, we can drag this all the way down here, and let's stick it into the height value of this bump here. And then also I don't want it to be inverted, so we will turn off the invert, and I'll just leave the strength at a 0.04 so it's very subtle. And then the last thing that I want to do is just add a bump to the tile, so the edges of the tiles. So we'll duplicate this one more time, drop it here, and we can go all the way over to the mapping. We can take the brick texture factor, this is just white and black, and we can drag this over here and we can stick it here into the height value of this bump. Let's Control Shift and select the principled shader to preview it. So the strength here, I'm going to turn this up to like a 0.5 so it's a lot stronger. And then we can also click on the invert button so it is going back in. So it's kind of hard to see right now because it's on the edge. But if I take the mapping scale and just kind of scale that up bigger, now you can see there is that clear sharpness there on the edge of the tiles, and it's kind of reflective. So that is it for the procedural material. So let's now join it together into a custom node group. So I'll box select all the nodes, and I'll press Ctrl G to join them together into a node group. Let's hit the tab key to go outside the node group, and I'm going to drag the node group over here, and we'll copy the material name and we'll paste it here into the node group. Let's also make this a bit bigger, and I'll press the N key to open up the side panel, and then we can hit tab to go back into the node group. Now if you go to the group tab here, let's just rename this to shader, and then we can plug up all the custom values. So I want to plug up the mapping scale here to control the size of the material. So I'll put the scale into the extra socket. Let's click on the scale, and I want to make it one value, so we'll change the vector to float instead. And then the default value, I want to turn that to 1. And let's also go out of the node group, and then the scale here will turn back to 1. So now that'll change the size of the material. So we'll go back into the node group. Then I want to control the tile scale, so let's take the scale value here, or the brick texture, we'll put that into the extra socket, and I'll rename this to tiles scale. Then I want to control the large chunk scale, so if I just drag the group input way over here, you can see we have the large chunks, and that's going to control the size of those chunks there. So we'll put the Voronoi scale here into the extra socket. Let's call this large chunks scale. And then the group input here was in the node group, so let's press Alt P to bring it out of the node group. Then I want to add the two colors here, the gray noise. So let's drag this up here. We can take color 1, put that into the extra socket, and color 2, put that into the extra socket. And then we'll rename these to color 1. And then this one here is going to be color 2. And then I want to control the medium chunks and the small chunks. So let's drag this down here. And we'll take the Voronoi here, put that into the extra socket. And then this one here, put the scale into the extra socket. And we'll rename this to medium chunk scale. And then the last one here, this is going to be small chunks scale. Then I want to control the two other colors, so we'll drag this up here, and we could take this mix color, we can put color A into the extra socket and color B into the extra socket, and let's rename this to color 3. And I'm also going to rename this one to color 4. Then I want to control the individual size of each one of these. So let's drag this down here, and we have these hue saturation values to change the size of each one of them. So we'll put this one here into the extra socket, and then the second one, the second value into the extra socket, and this one here, put that into the extra socket. And let's rename all these. So the first one here, I'm going to call large chunk size. The second one here, we'll call this medium chunk size. And then the last one here, we'll call small chunk size. So real quick, if I go out of the node group here, we have the large chunk size, the medium chunk size, and then the small chunk size, because the hue saturation values there are making it brighter and darker, so it's controlling the size of each one of those. Then I want to control the roughness, so we'll just drag this over here to the principled shader. We can put the roughness into the extra socket. And then finally, I want to control the bump strengths. So let's drag this down here. So the first one is going to be the chunks bump strength. So we'll put the strength into the extra socket. Rename this to chunks bump strength. Then the second one here, this one is going to be the noise bump strength. So we'll put that into the extra socket. And let's rename this to noise bump strength. And then the final one here, that's going to be the tiles. So we'll put the strength in the extra socket, and I'll rename this to tiles bump strength. So let's hit the tab key to go outside the node group. Actually, I want to drag the node group over here, just stick it there, drag the group input there, hit the N key to close the side panel, and hit the tab key to go outside the node group. Let's just review this material. So we have the overall scale value, then we just have the tile scale, then we also have the large chunk scale, and then we also have color 1 and color 2. And I put these up here because these are kind of controlling the main base colors, and I can make this black color lighter or darker. Then we have the medium chunk scale and the small chunk scale, and then after that we have color 3 and color 4, and those are controlling the colors there for the medium and small chunks. So that's why I have them after this one. Then we have the large chunk size, medium, and small. Then we also have the roughness of the material, and then we also have these 3 different bump strengths if we want to make them more bumpy. So that's it for the third terrazzo tile material. So let's do the fourth one. Alright, so now for the fourth terrazzo tile material, it's going to be pretty similar to this one. It is going to look different, but the node setup is going to be pretty similar. So we're going to duplicate the node setup and then just change some things, and that'll really speed up the process. So I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate. We'll duplicate this object, and we're going to move it over on the Y-axis and just bring it right down there. So we'll select this object, and we're going to click on this button here on the material to duplicate it so it's a separate material, and I'm going to rename it to Terrazzo Tile 4. Then if we select the node group, we're going to press Control-Alt-G, and Control-Alt-G is going to get rid of the node group, and let's drag these nodes over so the material output is right here. So now we still have that same node group, but we've just taken it out of the node group, but we still have the same node setup. Now also right up here on the gray noise, I'm going to select all these nodes and delete them and delete the frame because I don't want the gray noise group. And then here for this colored noise, I'm going to click on this and press F2 to change the label. And I'm just going to call it color because this group is what we'll be using for the main color. So I now want to create a few different color variations. So I'm going to select the color ramp and the mix color, and I'll press Control-Shift-D to duplicate the nodes but keep the wires plugged up, and I'll just stick it right there. And I can just drag this down here and maybe put the noise texture in the center. Let's Control-Shift and select this top mix to preview it, and I can zoom in here and we can change some of the noise settings. So I'm going to turn this scale here to a 5.4, and then I'll turn the detail to the max of 15, and on the roughness here I'll turn this to a 0.82. And then here on the color ramp, we can change both of these color ramps. So this one I'm going to drag over a little bit and then drag the white tab over quite a little bit so it is more darker. And then also here on this bottom color ramp, if I control shift and select this mix, this one I want to maybe drag this over a little bit, but then this one here I'm going to drag over a bit so it's a bit brighter. So now we can change all the colors here of these mix colors. Now if you want to use the same colors I'm using, you can use the same hex values. So color A here on the first one is going to be a hex value of 525252, and then color B is going to be fully black, so it's just going to be all these zeros, so 6 zeros. Then for color A here on the bottom one, this is going to be a hex value of 89, 8A, 80, and then for color B, this is going to be a hex value of 2F, 2F, 2F. So they're all pretty gray. So I now want to change all the sizes of the large chunks and the medium chunks and the small chunks. So first let's control shift and select the large chunks. And for this one, I'm going to drag the white tab over a little bit, and then also drag the black tab over a little bit, and stick them kind of about there. And then as for the Voronoi, let's change the scale. So I'll change this to a 25, and I'll make sure the detail is all the way at 0. Now let's control shift and select the medium chunks. And for this one, I do want to change the color ramp. So for this one, I'm going to drag the black tab kind of to about here, and then the white tab kind of to about there. And then to change the settings of the Voronoi, I'm going to change the scale to like an 83, and I'll turn the detail to 0. And then also control shift and select this color ramp. This detail, we also want it to be 0. And for the scale, because this is really small, I'm going to turn this up to like 200, so it's really small. And then for the color ramp, I'm going to drag the black tab kind of over here, and then also let's drag the white tab over to about there. So now what I want to do is go up here to all these different mixes here, and I want to delete them just because I want to kind of restart over and recreate this how we're joining them all together. So we'll select this mix and delete it, the hue saturation value, delete that, and this mix, delete that. Also this light tint here, delete that. And this one, I'll just press Shift D to duplicate it and drop it here, and this light tint, I can delete that. So we're just going to use one of these light tints here. So we're first going to be mixing together the large chunks and the medium chunks. So let's take the medium chunks color, put that into B, and then we can take the large chunks color and put that into A. So if I control shift and select it to preview it, you can see we have large and medium together. Then I'll duplicate the light tint and drop it here so we have another one. And this one we're going to mix in the small chunks. So the small chunks is going to go into color B, and then this light tint is going to go into color A. So now they're all mixed together. And then I'm also going to duplicate this one more time, stick it here, and this one we're going to change the light tint back to mix, and we're going to use this one just to mix the colors together. So this last one here, we're going to mix together these colors here into the mix. So we want this light tint to be going into the factor. So this is determining where color A and color B is. So now this mix color here result, that can go into color A, and then this mix result here can go into color B. And make sure you control shift and select it to preview it. And now you can see that we have some parts which are darker and some parts are lighter, and there's a lot of detail, and that looks really interesting. So we can put the result here, the mix result, into the base color, and I can control shift and select the shader to preview it. And that's looking really cool. And this might actually be my favorite terrazzo tile shader of all the ones that we're creating. I just really like how interesting it is. It has a lot of detail. And then there's also like some darker areas and some lighter areas. So now we just need to plug in the values of the bump here, and then of course join it together into a node group, but we kind of already have these bumps here. So what I'm first going to do is take this light in here, and that is just all those chunks. We'll put that into the height value. So now if I control shift select the principled shader, this strength here is just going to add all those chunks there. And then for this bump here, I want to add a noise. So let's just search for a noise texture, drop it here. We can put the factor into the height value of this bump. And we can also select all these nodes and press Ctrl J to add a frame if you want to. You can kind of drag these up here, and you can press F2 to add a label, and you can just call that bump if you want to keep the nodes nicely organized. And then I want to use the object coordinates. So way over here, we can take this mapping here, and we can take the mapping and plug that all the way here into the vector of this noise, and then you can see the wires overlapping. So if you hold down the shift key and right click and drag over the wire, you can add a reroute, and I'll drag it here, shift, right click and drag, add another reroute and drag it over here, just so that the wires aren't overlapping, so the wire goes down, over, and then into the noise. So now we can change this noise texture settings. So I'm going to turn the scale to 30, let's turn the detail up to 6, and then I'll leave the other settings how they are. So now this bump strength here is just going to add a bit of noise, and I do want to keep it very subtle. So let's turn the bump strength way down to a 0.015, just a 0.015, so it's very subtle. And then for the last one here, this is going to be the tiles bump strength, which is already being plugged into the height value. So now we can join this together into a custom node group. So I'm going to box select all the nodes except the material output. I'll press Ctrl G to join it together into a node group. Let's hit the tab key to go out of the node group, and I'll just drag the node group over here. And I'll drag the node group out to make it bigger, and then we can copy the material name and we'll paste it here into the node group. Let's hit the tab key to go into the node group, and I can hit the N key to open up the side panel. Let's just make this a bit smaller. And then here on the BSDF here, I'll rename this to shader because I like that better. So now let's go over here and we have the group input and we can plug up the custom values. So let's take the scale of the mapping and put that into the group input to control the entire scale. And then if I click on the scale here, I want to change the vector to float so it is one value. And then I can turn the default value to 1. And then we go out of the node group, let's turn this scale back to 1. So that's going to change the size of the entire material. Let's go back into the node group. We can also take the brick scale, put that into the extra socket, and then this one, I'll just rename this to tiles scale. And then you can also add a distortion value if you want to. So right over here on the group input, let's drag this over here. And you can see there's a distortion value, and that kind of makes it look more interesting. Maybe it kind of makes it look more like a granite or marble material. So let's take the factor, put that into the extra socket, and I'll rename this to distortion. Then I want to add color 1 and color 2. So I'll drag the group input right up here. And these two colors, I'll put A into the extra socket and B into the extra socket. And I'll call these color 1. And then just copy that, and this one is going to be color 2. Then I want to control this noise texture scale here. You can see if I scale this, it's basically going to change the color variation of where the colors are, so that's really cool. So I'll plug the scale into the extra socket, and I'll rename this to color variation scale. And then I want to control the other colors, so colors 3 and 4, which are going to be on this mix here. So we'll put A into the extra socket, and then B, put that into the extra socket, and then we'll rename this one. So this one's going to be color 3, and this one here is going to be color 4. And then I want to control all the sizes of the chunks. So I'll drag the group input down here, and you can see the Voronoi scale is going to change the entire scale, but then on the hue saturation value, the value is going to change each individual one. So I'm first going to plug the scale into the extra socket, and then we'll plug the hue saturation value, the value into the extra socket. So this one I'm going to rename to large chunks scale, but then the second one I'm going to rename to large chunks size. So the scale and the size. We'll do that for the second one. So the scale into the extra socket and the value into the extra socket. And this one will do the same thing. So this is going to be called medium chunk scale. And the second one is going to be medium chunks size because it's controlling the individual size. And we'll do that one more time for the last one. So the scale into the extra socket and the value into the extra socket. And we'll rename that one to small chunk scale. And then this one I'll rename to small chunks size. And then we can add the roughness. So I'll drag this right over here, and we can take the roughness of the principled shader, put that into the extra socket, and then we can add all the bump strengths. So the first one is the chunks, so we'll put that into the extra socket, and I can rename this to chunks bump strength. The second one here, this one is going to be the noise, so we'll plug that into the extra socket, and this one's going to be noise bump strength. And then the last one is the tiles, so we'll put that into the extra socket, and this one is going to be tiles bump strength. All right, so this is a really customizable one. It has a lot of values. Let's drag this back here. I'll hit the N key to close the side panel and hit the tab key to go outside the node group, and we can review this final material. So we have the overall scale to change the size of the entire material. You can see there's those tiles. Then we also just have the tile scale. We also have this cool distortion value, so you could make this look like maybe a marble or granite material if you want to by turning that up. Then we have these cool color variations. You can really get a different looking result if you change these. So you could maybe make it like blue or red or something. That looks pretty cool. And then also color 2, which is black. But you could also change this if you want to. And then we have the color variation scale. So if you want the color to be very different, you can turn that up, or you can turn it down just to have a few big colors. And then we also have color 3. This is pretty cool. You could make like a blue one. And then for color 4, you could maybe even make this like a red one or something. Just kind of change the look of that. So that looks really cool, but I'm just going to leave it as gray colors, but you can really change the look with those colors. Then we have all the scales. So the large chunks and the size, the medium chunks and the size, and then also the small chunks and the size. Then we have the roughness of the material, the chunks bump strength, the noise bump strength, and the tiles bump strength. So that's going to be it for part 2. So we've now created these 2 materials. So if you followed the other parts, then we now have a total of 4 different materials. And so in the final part, we're going to be creating the 5th material and the 6th material. So when that part is released, it's going to be right up there on the end screen, and the link will be in the description when it's released. So thank you so much for watching this tutorial, and I hope you enjoyed it. And again, if you'd like to purchase all these materials so you don't have to create them yourself to use them in your projects, then you can purchase the project files on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page. The links are in the description, or of course you can watch these videos and learn how to make them yourself. And you can also check out my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack to purchase all of my materials. So my Ultimate Material Pack comes with all of my materials pre-set up for Blender's asset browser with custom thumbnails, sorted catalogs, and customizable node groups. So once you've set up and installed my Ultimate Material Pack as an asset library in a Blender, you can just drag and drop the materials into your 3D scenes from the asset browser. You can also purchase any of my materials individually on my Gumroad store. And to learn how to create more materials, you can check out my Blender Procedural Material tutorial playlist here on YouTube. So thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the final part.